The next event will be summations from council, and we will start with Mr. Morrison.
Before I address the jury, Your Honor, I wish the record to reflect that the defense would be resting at this point in time.
Very good.
Thank you, sir. Judge Critchley, Mr. Mueller, Mr. Brenner, Mr. Stangeland, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I get to go first. Mr. Mueller gets to go last. You hear me first, you hear him last. I told you before, many weeks ago, my name is Martin Morrison. I've been a lawyer for about 43 years now. You never know what's going to walk through that door when you're a lawyer. This is one of those cases. It's a case that's very, very unique. It's very unusual. It touched a lot of lives. It touched my life 5 years ago when I became Mr. Stangeland's attorney. It touched your lives 8 or 9 weeks ago when you become members of this jury. It's affected you in your personal lives, your ability to do family functions, because this has been a part of your life for that period of time. And I know, and I thank you for your efforts in sitting here and listening to the testimony and weighing the evidence and watching the smart board and watching me and watching Mr. Mueller and Mr. Stangeland and all the things that were going on in this courtroom, because it takes something, patience. But more importantly, when you first got here and I first addressed you, I told you that you were special people. And you were special people in this case because you were deemed to be people who could hear the evidence in this case and weigh it and make a decision. Most importantly, you were reasonable people. You were people who could listen to the facts, assess weight to them, and make a decision. And that's what's going to happen when Mr. Mueller finishes his statement to you and after I have completed mine. Now, during the course of this particular case, particularly when I did my opening statement, I told you basically the roadmap that this case was going to take us to. And that roadmap wasn't like the road atlas that I had in my hand, although some of this case basically referred to things that are in that atlas, things that brought us from the state of Missouri to the state of New Jersey, through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri. The travels in this case were pretty much substantiated in the evidence in this case. What we have in this case, however, is a very unique set of facts. We have a set of facts that not only touch all of our lives, but touched a whole handful of people's lives, people who testified in this courtroom. Gail Mueller, Jeffrey Mueller, Patricia Lodge, Frederick Marsh, Charles Scammell, Officer Todd Warner, Officer Jeffrey Skinner, Officer Keith Vance, Officer John Randall, Investigator Steve Schloop, Investigator Shane Simmons, Nurse Ballard, Patrolman Kenneth Teets from the Newton Police Department, Detective Thomas Mueller, Detective Rita Gallo from the State Police, Detective Justin Blackwell from the State Police, Detective Diane Rude from the Prosecutor's Office, Detective Thomas Laird, Co-Defendant Andrew Wadle, young man who testified yesterday, Derek Stangeland, the defendant's son, and of course, Douglas Stangeland. It's affected a lot of people, and you know what? That was only part of the list that we originally gave you as the potential witnesses in this case, but those people were brought into this courtroom and testified. And you got a chance to see them and to determine what your opinions were of the testimony that they were offering and whether or not you accepted what they had to say. Now, my job in this particular case is not an easy job because my mom probably would have said, you've got a tall task, Martin, ahead of you. And, you know, I recognize that although we don't have the burden of proving anything here, I have to convince you as to why Doug Stangeland should be found not guilty by you people. And that's not an easy task, because I have to do it with words and the evidence that's been presented in this case. Now, what do we know from this case? Well, we know that that man was kidnapped from the state of New Jersey and was taken to Missouri. I mean, I can't sweep that under the rug. That's what happened here. And that man over there, he told you he was part of that plan, and part of that effort to bring that man back to Missouri. I'm not standing here trying to tell you that that wasn't a terrible thing that happened to Mr. Mueller and his family. It was. But I'm also not going to stand here and tell you that the life that Doug Stangeland had to live under a person named Billy Barger, that wasn't a horrendous situation either. And the problem that Mr. Morrison has is that I have to convey to you a legal concept, something that's in this book. This is the law of our state, the laws of our state. Something in this book that says, you know, even when things happen that are otherwise criminal, sometimes we have legal reasons in this book that say we can excuse what happened. And that man, his role as the judge has been to guide the trial through. He's the choreographer in the trial, so to speak, to make it flow smoothly, and he's done it. He's done that job. But you know where we're at today is that we're going to need him to tell us what the law in the state of New Jersey is, and he's going to do that. And part of your oath as jurors in the beginning was that you said that you could apply the law as Judge Critchley tells you it is. And even though it may not sit 100% on all fours with you when you weigh it, and you say, you know what, should I be balancing what happened to that man against what happened to that man? Well, you know, this isn't the scales when we balance it. It's a question of whether or not you believe that Douglas Stangeland has established in this case a defense to why things happened. It's not did they happen, they happened. I'm not going to, again, try to sweep that under the rug. I can't. I would have absolutely no credibility coming in front of you if I tried to say, oh, that man wasn't kidnapped, that didn't happen. That's stupid. I'm not going to do that. But that man, he lived a life of hell in a town called Nevada, Missouri, small town, smaller than Newton, according to his son. About 9,000 people, I think one of the officers testified to. The worst thing that ever happened to Nevada, Missouri was a guy named Billy Barger. Now, you heard witness after witness after witness come on that witness stand and testify during the course of this trial, long before that man took the stand and testified to you. Billy Barger said he was a Hell's Angel. Billy Barger said, my dad is Sonny Barger, Ralph Sonny Barger, president, founding father, whatever you want to call him, of the Hells Angels. Big guy in the Hells Angels, top guy. He's my dad, according to Billy Barger. And you know what? Because of who I am and the persona that I am creating to you, you have to be afraid of me. And you know what? Everybody was. Billy said, I'm Billy Barger, son of Sonny Barger. I'm a Hells Angel. I'm the real deal. And nobody questioned him. The police officers, they can talk now and say, you know what we found out afterward? We found out afterward he was nobody. Well, you know what? That was the wrong man, and so was Billy Barger. Sonny Barger didn't have any kids, according to the testimony we heard. Billy Barger wasn't his son. But he sure as heck lived like he was in Nevada, Missouri. It starts off with Billy Barger having the antagonistic attitude that he could run and do whatever he pleased. This is a man who, in summary, he threatened people with firearms. He pistol whipped people. He took young Derek out in the middle of a field and made him go out in the rain and stand there until he would say what Billy wanted him to say. Made him clean up blood from a porch. And you know, these are things that demonstrate exactly the persona that Billy Barger conveyed to the people of Nevada. These were the things that Billy Barger wanted you as a person in Nevada to accept. He wanted you to believe that you should fear me. And you know what happened? People feared him. Roy Slates, you know, you heard about Roy Slates. Roy Slates, businessman from Nevada who was owed $525,000 from a guy named Jeff Muller from New Jersey, said he was scammed out of the money by this guy, and a guy named Charles Scammell helped him. Roy Slates, he was afraid of Billy Barger. He was so afraid of Billy Barger, when Billy Barger took him at a meeting and hit him, punched him in the face, threatened him with that two-shot Derringer. He went and got money from his mother, $10,000 from his mother, because he knew he had to get that money and get it to Billy Barger. He gave him $10,000, knowing it was the seed money to come to New Jersey and get Jeff Muller. Why would he do that? He was afraid. He believed Billy Barger was who Billy Barger said he was. And two people from Bates County, two law enforcement officers, you heard testimony that Billy Barger threatened these two individuals because he alleged they didn't do their job. His girlfriend, Kim Hunter's daughter, had been the victim of a criminal act, and the Bates County Sheriff's Department didn't do their job, according to Billy. Billy threatened to kill a deputy sheriff from Bates County and the sheriff, Chad Anderson, from Bates County. And a meeting was held, Mr. Stangeland told you, a meeting was held, and people got together at this meeting, and you know what the result was? Absolutely nothing. The Bates County Sheriff's Department people, they didn't do anything. Billy Barger, he claimed he could bring 100, 150 nomads or Hell's Angels into a town. You know, the threat probably was tear it apart stick by stick, and everybody believed it. Well, what on earth would lead two sheriff's officers whose lives were threatened to just ignore it? Everybody was afraid of the Hell's Angels. And today, you know, we have to look at it in society, and we have to say, they are a presence in our society. There aren't many things that people fear, but you know what? The Hell's Angels certainly can fit on that list of things that we should fear. Today's a world of terrorism, today's a world of violence and threats and so on. You know what? We watch TV, we know from the media, we know that the Hell's Angels exist. They are a force to be reckoned with. And the people of Nevada certainly had to reckon with Billy Barger. Now, obviously we have heard there's this chapter of the Hell's Angels being formed. You know, it never was, because Billy Barger never was what he said he could be, but he sure convinced everybody he was who he said he was. This man created email addresses and received text messages and sent out messages himself, according to the testimony you heard from the investigators here. He sent out messages alleging to be Sonny Barger, the chief. He sent them to Doug Stangeland. He sent them to others in this case. And you know what? They received them, and they believed that it was Ralph Sonny Barger, and that Billy was the son of this man, and that Ralph Sonny Barger and the Hell's Angels were looking over Billy's shoulder for him. And that if you didn't do what Billy said, you would pay to the Hell's Angels for what you didn't do. Doug Stangeland told you he was afraid of Billy Barger and the Hell's Angels because he said they threatened his life, he threatened his son Derek's life, who you saw. That kid was affected by all of this relationship that happened with Billy Barger. And he threatened to kill his dad, 83-year-old man, as I recall, who has since passed away. So we have this person, Billy Barger. He's intimidating. People say he's mean. People say he doesn't hesitate to threaten people with his derringer, with his gun. He doesn't hesitate to shoot a gun if he wants to shoot one. He claims to have killed 237 people, and what the heck is 238? It doesn't mean nothing to me. You know, that's Billy Barger. We heard that testimony. So Billy Barger says, we need money. You know what? Billy Barger needed money. Billy Barger wasn't operating his cell phone business. It wasn't making a lot of money, apparently. And Billy Barger said, you know what? We'll form this chapter of the Hells Angels. We'll bring in some money. We'll buy a bar. There were all kinds of schemes and things talked about. And along comes Royce Slates, who talks to Doug Stangeland. And he says to Doug, you know what? I got in financial trouble. And you know why I got in financial trouble? Because people scammed me. And he gave him one name, a guy named Jeff Mueller and Charles Scammell. And I got scammed out of a lot of money. Almost $500,000 is about the sum that was talked about. And I'd like to get it back. Doug told Billy, you know, hey, you know what? When I first met him, Doug was exactly what he is today, the gray-haired guy. He shows emotions. He's a dad. He's a father. You know what? He was never a criminal. Told you that. No criminal record. This was not Doug Stangeland, and everybody said that. But here we are. Royce Slate says, I got this money to collect. Doug tells Billy Barger. Next thing you know, Billy Barger says, we're going to collect it. You know what? Billy Barger said, we're the Hells Angels. We can collect it. And Doug Stangeland is told at that point in time, you're going to help me, you're going to do this, you're going to collect it. Not only is he told that, he's ordered. Now, the preface to all of that is that after Mr. Barger threatens the two deputy sheriffs in Bates County, he says to Doug, I need a place to stay, and he goes into Doug's house and moves into Doug's house, and 3 days later, 4 days later, Doug is out of his own bedroom and living in the basement with his son Derek, and Billy Barger has now moved into Doug's house. He's moved into his master bedroom. He's taken over the place. It's now no longer Doug Stangeland's house, it's Billy Barger's house. He moves Kim Hunter. You heard that story. She's brought there and she wanted an escape from her old boyfriend. Kim Hunter ends up moving in with Billy Barger. And here's this guy who plays the persona of, I am the Hells Angels. I'm going to form a chapter. I'm the son of Sonny Barger. Be afraid of me. And everybody was. So what happens from there? Well, we have, I believe they called it Bushwhacker days, was when all of this kind of started, and Billy goes in the house, and Billy takes over, and you know, you heard about the things that went on. You heard about Royce Slates is threatened. You heard about Doug is sent down with Lonnie Swarns and Andrew Wadle to go down to Mr. Scammell's house, and you know, it's another terrible incident. Another one I just can't sweep under the rug, but I have to suggest to you that it all falls within this framework of, was there a threat with Billy Barger? You know, I don't mean to jump into another area, but nothing stood out more in this case than when we listened to the officers from the Vernon County Sheriff's Office. And one of them said, all Doug needed to do was to come to us and we would have given him protection. And I remember asking that officer on the stand, what kind of protection were you going to give Mr. Stangeland from the Hells Angels? You know, you could go and pick up the phone and call anytime and say, guess what? Billy Barger says he's the head of the Hells Angels here. His father's the head of the Hells Angels. He threatened me. He's going to burn my house down if I don't do this. He's going to kill my son, kill me, kill my father. He's going to do these horrendous things. And probably because of who Doug Stangeland was at the time in the town and a person of respect. Owned the vending machine company, owned the trucking company. They probably would have gone and arrested Billy Barger. And what do you think in Doug Stangeland's mind would have happened the next day after Billy Barger was put in handcuffs and locked up? Sonny Barger would have learned about it and sent 100 nomads or 150 Hells Angels down to plant themselves on the lawn of Doug Stangeland's house in Nevada, Missouri, probably burn the house down, kill him, kill his family. That's what Doug Stangeland told you he was afraid of. He couldn't run away from it. It was like Noah running away from the flood. You know, you couldn't do it. The Hells Angels were going to be there no matter what. So they go to Scammell's house, and Andrew Wadle poisons the dogs. You know the story. I don't need to go through it all and tell you all about it, but during the course of it, shooting takes place. Doug Stangeland went in there, had a ski mask on. He was the big guy. He went in there, and John Randall wrote a report, and I cross-examined him. He was one of the police officers from Vernon County. And when I asked him about his report, he stated, yes, Charles, meaning Charles Scammell, further stated that the bigger suspect, Doug Stangeland, Lonnie Swarns was the medium guy and the other one was the young guy, but Doug was the big guy. Charles stated that the bigger suspect always kept his finger outside the trigger guard and the gun was in his left hand. The smaller suspect kept the gun in his right hand and his finger on the trigger the whole time during the assault. Doug Stangeland told you, I don't know what happened. I didn't intend to shoot Charles Scammell. The gun went off. It was an old rusty shotgun. Billy Barger supplied the gun to him. Even the victim said, when I saw him holding the gun, he didn't have his finger in the trigger guard. He went on further to state that in that report, Charles further stated he thinks the guy did not mean to shoot him. Changed his mind afterward because in this scenario, he said it was Lonnie Swarns who he thought shot him, the shorter guy, initially on, said it to the officers. And later on, after Doug Stangeland got arrested and owned up to the fact that it was him, he was the one that had the gun and the gun went off. It was at that point in time that Mr. Scammell suddenly had the revelation that, oh yeah, this was Doug Stangeland who shot me. And the story changed from the way he told the police. Was Charles Scammell a victim? Absolutely. I mean, he didn't deserve to have somebody come in and do a home invasion in his house, but Billy Barger ordered that man and the other two individuals to do that. He ordered them to do it. Why? You got to find this guy, Jeff Mueller, a guy from New Jersey who scammed slates. This is 25% of $525,000 we're looking at here, boys. Billy Barger saw dollar signs, just like he saw 8,000 of the 10,000 that Roy Slates put up. Gave 2,000 to the boys to come to New Jersey initially on, and did something else with the 8,000 that was different. So we listened to all the witnesses, and all the witnesses substantiate that Billy Barger was ordering people around and telling them to do things, including Doug Stangeland. Ordering them to do things that ordinarily you wouldn't expect a guy like Stangeland to do. Went to somebody's house with a ski mask on and a shotgun in his hand. Somebody killed the man's dogs. He went in there, the gun went off, he shot the man's fingers off. Everybody was stunned that the gun went off and that somebody got shot. But guess what? I can't sweep it under the rug. It all happened. It was part of this thing that happened. All I can do is hope that I can explain to you why it happened and not did it happen. Because if the why it happened is sufficient to plant in your minds that maybe there was an excusable reason for it. And I know I'm asking you for that tall task to do that. But I'm asking you to seriously consider what this case is about, because it really isn't difficult. It really is simple. And then we have a period of time in between. And you know what? Doug Stangeland is looking for the out. Takes his son to Florida after the Scammell incident. Takes him to Florida, and they're looking to possibly relocate there. Well, Florida turned out to be another hell for him and Derek. They got robbed. Things were stolen out of the vehicle. They came back to Nevada. Didn't work out. But Doug saw it as the escape, something he was looking for. I got to get away from Billy Barger and this Nevada lifestyle that I've put myself into. Now, the prosecutor's going to tell you that Doug Stangeland, he made his bed and he has to sleep in it because he created this problem because of the relationship with Billy Barger. You have to look at that persona of Billy Barger and understand Doug Stangeland wasn't in control of this situation. Doug Stangeland, he was the last guy in the world that you would ever expect would be a Hell's Angel. He had no motorcycle, he had no interest in motorcycles. And, when you see this picture and evidence close up as it was on the screen, you're going to realize real quick that the outfit that he's wearing really isn't Doug Stangeland. He doesn't look like the biker that would be a Hell's Angel. The staged picture, the posers as they would refer to in a picture, the posers as the officer later looking back said they all were. There were no Hell's Angels in Nevada. They never existed, which is probably true. With regard to the incident that then occurs, Doug is told, come to New Jersey. Here's the instructions. Here's the stuff off of the internet. Here's how you find Jeff Muller. Go find him. He's in Mahwah, New Jersey. He's a scam artist. Scammed Roy out of $500,000. Probably looked at him and said, he's not the local pet store owner. He's a scammer. He's as much a criminal as some of the other people like Billy Barger was. So they come looking for him, and he's not in Mahwah. We later learn, I believe, from the state police officer, Blackwell, that he actually had moved to New York State. He was an individual who lived in New York State then. But we learned that Mr. Muller is nowhere to be found in Mahwah or Fairlawn. But guess what? There's a Jeff Muller. He's in Newton, New Jersey. Owns a pet food store on whatever it is, East, West, Clinton Street, whatever the street is. And go get him. Billy Barger says, you go get him. And you heard all about, okay, where you couldn't rent a car because we had a Walmart credit card, prepaid card, whatever, we couldn't do this. Lonnie Swarns and Doug come to New Jersey. They scout out the situation and whatever, but Lonnie ends up with a diabetic problem, and they go back empty-handed after having spent money that was provided to him by Billy Barger. They go back empty-handed to Missouri, and they have to tell Billy Barger, Doug has to say, we failed. We failed at our mission. And Billy Barger, he comes back with a flurry of emails and threats again. The family is not going to be happy about this. And, he actually puts that man on a trip that, boy, you're on a guilt trip, Doug, because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You didn't live up to what you were told you needed to do, what you were ordered to do. You didn't bring back Jeff Muller. So Doug Stangeland's told, you're going to pay this time, you're going to pay for the trip out, and there's no rent-a-cars or whatever. Doug takes his car, and he and Andrew Wadle and Lonnie Swarns head out for New Jersey in January of 2010. And the mission is to find that man who they believe to be the Jeff Muller that scammed Mr. Slates out of money. He's the wrong guy. But you know what? Billy Barger says, that's him, you get him, you bring him back. They ordered him to do it. While we're on the subject, it sounds like everybody in Nevada somehow had a firearm or a gun or something. Doug Stangeland had a gun. You saw a picture of it, I think, at one time. It's a .38, like Detective Special, snub-nose handgun. And you heard about that gun in this case because Mr. Mueller said he had been threatened by a gun, but you never heard him say that he was ever threatened by Doug Stangeland with a gun. You never heard that. You never heard that Doug Stangeland was ever seen in the presence of that man with that gun. Mr. Stangeland told you, I brought the gun along, I put it in the glove box in my Chevy Malibu, and I took it out when I went into the Super 8 motel in East Stroudsburg when I stayed the night before. Took it into the hotel because, you know, you don't leave a gun in the parking lot of a motel, I guess, in a car. He thought enough to do that. And then in the morning when he came back out, he put it back in the glove box. And guess what? It never left the glove box, according to the evidence in this case, the entire time until one of the police officers in Lake Ozark, Missouri, removed it from that glove box. There's no evidence that Doug Stangeland ever used the firearm. Did he have one? Yeah. Did he have a permit to carry it in New Jersey? No. Detective Laird testified, no, he didn't have the right to do that. I wanted to dispose of that issue with regard to the firearm to indicate to you that there was never any evidence that Doug Stangeland threatened Jeff Mueller with the gun. Lonnie Swarns, different situation, not within the control necessarily of Doug Stangeland. Wadel, he had a handgun. It was an interesting 380, and it was in his knapsack or his backpack in the trunk of the car. Lonnie Swarns, he had two things. He had, in his pocket, he had a 380, Smith & Wesson 380. He also had the stun gun when the police got him. He had the two weapons that were described by Jeff Mueller. Now, how do we justify what happened to Jeff Mueller, the victim in this particular case? We can't justify it other than to tell you the reason why it happened. But Mr. Stangeland said to you, when I was questioning him, he said, we didn't think we were going there to pick up, you know, like a pet store owner. We thought we were going to get this scam artist. We didn't think he would fight back. And guess what happened? Jeff Mueller, he was feisty enough that when Lonnie Swartz said to him, come on, you're coming with us, he wasn't going. He didn't know who these people were. He didn't know why he was being asked. And you know what? At that point in time, I'd have to suggest to you that probably Swarns and Stangeland and Wadel, they all figured this was the right guy at that point. This is what we were told to do, and he wasn't going to fight back. It was a matter of money. It was a matter of this scam artist was going to go along with us. Either we were going to get the information from him, or when we got to Clearfield, Pennsylvania, some other people were going to meet us and get the information from him. Bank account information, offshore accounts, whatever is necessary. And they were going to affect some kind of a transfer of the funds from that man's bank account into Billy Barger's account, Hell's Angels account, whatever you want to call it. But he fought back. And Lonnie Swarns ended up going down on the ground with him. But you know what? The evidence was pretty clear. I think even Andrew Wadel testified to this. Doug Stangeland just about got out of the car at that point in time from the passenger seat front while Mr. Mueller and the guy Swarns were struggling on the ground. And Andrew Wadel, he was in the rear seat, driver's side. He got out. By the time Doug Stangeland got out of the car and tripped and stumbled over his own size 13 shoes, his feet, on a snow-covered pavement, Jeff Mueller was already in the car. Jeff Mueller was already the property of Lonnie Swarns. And Stangeland came around and drove. And they headed out, toward Pennsylvania. Went out Route 94, et cetera, et cetera. They zip-tied him. Andrew Wadle reached over, zip-tied his ankles and zip-tied his hands. That was part of the plan that Billy Barger had given to them as to how to handle the situation. Came with zip ties. Along the way, Doug Stangeland is more and more coming to the same conclusion he came to when he met Charles Scammell. It's the wrong guy. This isn't someone of significant financial means. This isn't the scammer who assisted Jeff Mueller from Mahwah, New Jersey, in scamming $500,000 from Roy Slates. You know, it's really, oh, I can take care of the funding. Just give me $525,000 and I'll get you $8 million. That's a scam. Pays back $20,000, I think, and then another $20,000 payment to Slates. So Slates really had about $480,000 owed to him, according to what I understand. So they realize this guy's a pet store owner. He's got inventory, he's got nickels and dimes in his bank accounts and whatever. He's not the right guy. And we convey that. Doug Stangeland conveys that. And it's conveyed to Billy Barger. And as he's approaching Clearfield, he really believes that the Hells Angels are going to be in Clearfield and potentially be waiting there to meet and interrogate this person that they're bringing there. And he knows, at that point in his mind, he's saying, this is not the right guy. This is not the Jeff Mueller that owes Roy Slates the money. Can't be. Billy Barger doesn't want to hear it. Bring him on. And when he gets to Clearfield, he said, park there for a while. Doug Stangeland said to you, I was very concerned. There was no way I was going to let the Hells Angels get hold of Jeff Mueller, especially knowing he was the wrong guy. He said, it wasn't going to happen. He formulated a plan. Now, was the plan going to work? He was hoping that when the Hells Angels showed up, that Lonnie Swarns would do what Lonnie Swarns always does. He's the lead guy. He gets out of the car. And that Andrew Wadle would go to, probably Stangeland would have said to him, Andrew, go make sure they are who they are or something. Because it was his plan, he told you, that if that situation arose, he remembered the sheriff from Du Bois, Pennsylvania, and he was going to drive out of there. But you know what? There wasn't a lot of trust between Lonnie Swarns and Doug Stangeland at that point in time. He didn't know where these people sat with regard to this whole situation. Doug was concerned. It didn't come to pass because you and I know, looking back now, the Hells Angels were never going to show up because they weren't part of this package. They weren't part of this real deal that Billy Barger had created. And Billy told them, just come on, bring them back here. And it was go to Cleveland, go to St. Louis, come on back, bring them back to Missouri. And all the way back, what was on Doug Stangeland's mind? I wrote it down, ultimately. The breakdown was the answer to the problem. He was looking for a solution to the problem. He was looking for a solution how he could not put Jeff Mueller, the victim, in harm's way with Billy Barger. Because he was truly afraid that Billy Barger would do to Jeff Mueller what Billy Barger threatened to do to him and his family, kill him. And he looked for a solution. He looked for a solution that would occur that would allow him to escape two problems. The problem was not only keeping Jeff Mueller from harm, but he had to worry about himself and his son and his family too. He had to worry about the Hells Angels. He had to worry about Billy Barger. And jumping all the way ahead, we get somewhere along the way, and Lonnie Swarns leans over to Doug Stangeland, who's driving the car, and shows him a text message from Billy Barger written to Lonnie Swarns. And the text message says, Doug's asking too many questions. Kill him after you get to Missouri. Lonnie Swarns shows Doug Stangeland. I mean, me, I would have drove off the roadway, but, you know, this was a threat. This was a real threat from Billy Barger through Lonnie Swartz. Kill him. And Doug was satisfied that because Lonnie showed him the text message, rather than to just go on and not show it to him, Doug was satisfied that Lonnie took the time to do that, that he was not going to get whacked by Lonnie Swartz at that point in time. But was he ever really sure? He really never trusted Lonnie and really didn't know. So he was cautious. So they got to Missouri, and they got near Lake Ozark. They filled up with gas and got some snacks or whatever. Lo and behold, it's 5 below zero, and something freezes up and the car goes dead. They get towed into Rick's C store. Great name, you know. Every time I think about it, convenience C, whatever. I'm sure that's what it means. Anyway, we know that they get towed in there and they spend some time there, and we know what happens once we get to Rick's C store. Lonnie Swartz and Andrew Wadle, they're in and out the car. They go inside, they're getting warm because there's no heat in the car. Doug Stangeland, he's in the driver's seat. Victim, Jeff Muller, he's got a blanket over him. He's zip tied. But you know what? Doug Stangeland said he wasn't zip tied really, really tight because we would let him have a loose zip tie so he could go do his business when we needed to get him out of the car to go to the bathroom, whatever. We let him do that. And Mr. Muller said to you at one point in time, he asked Doug Stangeland if he could loosen the zip tie that was down on his leg because his foot itched. And Doug Stangeland told him, yeah, go ahead. It was part of Doug Stangeland's developing of a plan as to how he was going to solve the problem. He was going to get out of this particular situation. And you know what it was all about? It was all about let him escape. If he escapes, Billy Barger's going to look at it as just another screw up by Doug Stangeland. He's not going to look at it as one of those things that demands, hey, the family's got to kill me, kill my family, kill my son. He didn't need to do that. He looked at it and said, Billy Barger's going to look at it and say it's another screw up. So, Jeff Muller gets out of the car, takes off when Doug feigns that he's asleep, and the unthought of happens. Lonnie Swartz sees it, comes running out into the gas station parking lot. Well, you know, you got to see that on the smart board. You got to watch exactly what happened in the parking lot. Doug Stangeland is the big guy, obviously talking to the guy who was there at the pumps pumping gas. The guy whose SUV Jeff Muller tried to get into to save me, whatever. And Lonnie Swartz is the one, he and Wadle are the ones that go out and after Jeff Muller, not Doug Stangeland. Doug Stangeland stands there, and you heard that Doug Stangeland at that point in that parking lot said, I've had enough, that's it. He was basically saying, this is it, I'm done. And Lonnie Swartz grabbed Jeff Muller and put him back in the car. Now, you heard Fred Marsh. He testified about how two guys were carrying him by the legs, and one guy was by the arms, and the other guy was grabbing the legs and whatever, you know. Put whatever credibility you want on Fred Marsh. He's probably a real good guy, former parole officer. But you know what? It's somewhat conflicted, his testimony, with the testimony of others, including the alleged victim here. I just used the word alleged. I didn't mean to use the word alleged. He is the victim. He is a victim. And through the testimony, we learned about a lot of other little details that lead up to this. They lead up to Doug Stangeland and Lonnie Swartz and Andrew Wadle getting arrested in Lake Ozark, Missouri. We learned that when they get arrested, they're lodged in the Miller County Jail, and at some point in time, a few days after the incident occurs, Doug Stangeland learns the truth. Billy Barger's a fraud. Billy Barger's not who he was saying he was. Sonny Barger says he has no kids. We talked to his lawyer. Sonny Barger, no relationship. Hell's Angels don't exist in Nevada. Billy Barger knows nothing about it. So here we are, Doug Stangeland suddenly finds a second resolve to the problem. The problem is they did some horrendous things to people. And here they are, they're locked up in jail. But you know, what does Doug Stangeland do? Doug Stangeland owns up to what had happened. He gives all the details. You watched it. You watched his interviews. He told the police exactly what had occurred. And so did Lonnie Swarns and so did Andrew Wadle. Because the key to the whole thing was the threat was gone from Billy Barger. He wasn't who he said he was. The persona was there initially, but Billy Barger was no longer a threat. Doug no longer had to worry about whether Derek was going to get killed or his dad Kenneth was going to get killed, or he was going to get killed or his house was going to get burned down. What he had to worry about was what had happened. And you know what? Right from the beginning of this case, when their mouths are opened up to the police, that man in particular says, Billy Barger ordered me to do these things. Billy Barger threatened me. There's no fabrication here. This was what occurred, and this was what was substantiated in these proofs. And that's what this case is all about. You know, why does a grown man get down on his hands and knees basically to a guy named Billy Barger? Because Billy Barger had the persona he said he had. Along the way, we have some issues that we need to deal with, though. You had basically a businessman, a good man, family man, raised his son from the time his son was born till the time he was, whatever, 14, 15 years old. Tried to find a way out. Let's go to Florida, let's do something. He knew that the household situation where they were living with Billy Barger in the house wasn't good for Derek. He knew. But you know what? He knew that his son was alive, and he knew that his father was alive, and he knew that he was alive, and he was looking for the solution to the problem, and he couldn't find it. It's almost like having financial troubles. You look for it, and you hope you can find it, and you can't find the solution. He couldn't find it. But Billy Barger was like the snowball going down the hill, you know, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Billy Barger just kept taking more and more advantage of situations. And what we learned about him is not only did he threaten Slades and Doug, whatever, but we heard this young man take the stand. He came here because he wanted to be here and testify to you people. He came from Missouri. 21 years old now, grown-up man. And he humbled himself to get on the stand and to testify to you. He told you he has nightmares to this day about Billy Barger and the way that that household was run and the threats that were made against him. Billy Barger took this boy at the time, took him out into a field in the middle of nowhere where there was a camper, pouring rain, lightning, thunderstorm, whatever you want to call it. And he wanted this boy to say something. He wanted to answer a question that Billy Barger had of him. We didn't get to the point of what that question was, but Billy Barger badgered him until the point that he said, I told Billy what he wanted to hear. Because you know what? He kept sending me outside in the rain for 30 minutes. Come back in. He had a Derringer on there. You tell me whether or not that 15-year-old kid didn't think that maybe he was going to die that day. Billy Barger was in control that day. He was a bad person. Everybody said it. He was evil. And he still is. But he's not who he said he was. He doesn't have that clout that he claimed he had. He made that boy get down and clean up the deck where Billy had made a mess because he chose to beat somebody up and make them bleed onto the deck. He made that boy clean that mess up to the point where the kid had to sand the deck to make it clean because Billy ordered him to do it. Andrew Wadle, remember Andrew Wadle? He came in here. I mean, you know, he's in his prison garb and all of that and whatever, and he told you I did what I did. He said Billy Barger threatened him. Billy Barger had Lonnie Swarns and Doug Stangeland hold him over a rail, threatening to drop him at one point in time. Billy ordered it. Billy ordered it. Billy ordered it. That's what we kept hearing in here. Billy was in charge. Now, Billy Barger, in his persona, you heard testimony, he had a wife named Sherry, he had an S on his ring finger for Sherry, but at some point in time, guess what, he changed it. Changed it to 81, and the officers testified the significance of 81. Billy Barger wanted to convey to the people and the public that he was what he said he was. He was a Hell's Angel. The picture, I think Derek said it in some way. This was a picture that was posed for purposes allegedly of sending it to Sonny Barger to show that in fact they were forming this chapter of the Hell's Angel, the Heartland chapter. Who supplied the clothes, right? Andrew Wadle said Billy Barger supplied the shirts. Doug Stangeland said it. The vest belonged to Billy Barger that he told him to put on. The thing on the head came from Billy Barger. I think Derek said that Lonnie Swarns had gone out and bought them at some local dollar store or something. But this is a bunch of posers because Billy Barger ordered them to line up and take a picture. Billy's in that picture with Kim Hunter. Billy's in that picture too. And you know what? Billy's in that picture, and on the back of the original picture, there are names written there. And you know, Billy Barger wanted everybody to call him Brutal. That was his nickname. He called him Vendor because he had a vending machine company. To his dissatisfaction, he called Derek, instead of Derek, he called him Youngblood. Everybody got a name in the household. But Billy was Brutal. That was his name. And you know what? That was exactly what Billy wanted people to know and believe about him, that he was a brutal individual. The guy who allegedly killed 237 people. Mr. Stangeland was Mr. Stangeland. He's as apologetic as he can be. You know, how much can we expect him to say to Mr. Mueller, I'm sorry this happened, or to say to Mr. Scammell, I'm sorry that this has happened? It happened. It's like pushing Niagara Falls back over the top. We just can't make it right. But the fact of the matter is that you can make things right. You can listen to the law that's going to be given to you. You can review that law and you can say, you know what, it happened, but this is why it happened. That's what I just spent much time as I could spend trying to convey to you without insulting your intelligence, because you all listened to all of the testimony. If I said something that you don't recollect to be the facts, ignore what I said. You remember what you remember, because you're the jury in this case. That's what your function is. But you know what? In the law, in this book, we recognize that there are reasons why things happen. We always hear about self-defense as the most common defense. Person acted in self-defense. You know what? They did something that they ordinarily wouldn't do that would be a criminal act. The book says if it was in self-defense, it's okay. We excuse it. There's certain things that need to be established, though. Things that need to be established for duress or coercion, the prosecutor's probably going to tell you all about. Person can't recklessly put themselves in the situation that leads to this. Now, I have to suggest to you that's a pretty harsh word, recklessness. Did that man have control over his life once Billy Barger moved in? Nah. I don't think so. I don't think you think so. What do we have here? We have people of reasonable firmness have to believe in the defense. That's what the law is going to tell you. Reasonable firmness. You're the people who have to be people of reasonable firmness. You have to be sensible to the issues that's going to be before you. Did this all happen because Billy Barger threatened Doug Stangeland? Is that why Doug Stangeland is before this court being tried today? Is that why you're going to make a decision as to where we go from here? Some interesting testimony in the case. I mean, we heard Rita Gallo talk about gathering up all kinds of information, blood samples. Interesting. You know, we heard about Diane Rood, detective. She checked the phones out, found nothing of evidentiary value. We heard testimony from investigator Thomas Laird from the prosecutor's office. He said, we didn't find any permits for carrying that Doug Stangeland had for a firearm. But all of those witnesses from Missouri, all of the ones that were involved, knew Billy Barger. They knew who he was, they knew what he said he was. And they substantiated that at the time, that's what they believed he was. That's what Doug Stangeland believed. You know, they didn't hide their identity from Jeff Mueller. They didn't put masks on like they did when they went to the Scammell residence. Why would they? They didn't think they were going there to pick up anything less than a criminal. They didn't think this guy was going to fight back. They figured he was the scam artist that they had been told he was. He was going to pay the money over that he owed. Probably did this before, pay the money over, and that was going to be the end of it. He'd go back to Mahwah, New Jersey, or back to Newton and whatever. And he wasn't going to call the cops. He wasn't going to do anything. He was going to take care of it. It was a business debt. He was as bad as the criminals on the street as far as the Jeff Mueller they were looking for. Not this man. This man was an innocent victim. This man was a guy who had the wrong name. In fact, his middle initial was the wrong middle initial, which led Doug Stangeland to believe that. We had a lot of witnesses. We had Patricia Lodge. We had Mr. Scammell himself talk about things. We had Nurse Ballard, interesting lady, a forensic nurse, talk about how she took care of Mr. Mueller after this incident occurred. We had officers from Newton who basically pursued the interviews and charges here in New Jersey. We heard testimony that the role of Mr. Stangeland probably would substantiate that he was the minimal aggressor of the entire group. A lot of things happened quickly. I'm sure that Jeff Mueller, as he said, he wasn't sure about all the details as to who was doing what. But it was Lonnie Swarns who was alleged to have been the real aggressor here. He was the one that probably followed the directions of Brutal more than anyone else in the car. So do we have the answer to the problem? Car broke down. Was the breakdown the answer to the problem? To Doug Stangeland had provided that answer, and he acted on it. Otherwise, there was no way out. There was no way that Doug Stangeland was going to manage to get him out. Did he put himself in this situation? You know, the real question is whether or not he was reckless when he did it. That's what one of the instructions is going to be to you. He got to a point where things happened very quickly. He was not in control anymore. He didn't control his house. He didn't control his life. He didn't control his business. Billy Barger stole his money from his business. Continued to run his business. Billy Barger took his money. What can we do in this particular case? Mr. Morrison can stand in front of you and Mr. Morrison can talk for another hour, which I'm not going to do. I could probably tell you more and more facts about how when they originally went to Jeff Mueller's house, they decided we're not going to do a home invasion on him. We're not going to do that. That's not what we intended. Might be kids there. It's Christmas time. We're not going to go up there and go up his driveway and into his house. There was some sensibility in the way that this thing played out. And the concern is something I can't convey to you. maybe if you can view Doug Stangeland as the person that he is, from the way that he testified, and from the words he used, and the credibility that you might give to him, you might realize that, yeah, he is a good person inside. He did things that were horrendous. He did things that were terrible. Why did he do them? He did them because a guy named Brutal, his own nickname, look in the mirror and give myself a name, Brutal. That's what I want people to think of me as. A guy named Brutal told him, go to Scammell, go to New Jersey, grab the guy named Jeff Muller and bring him back for money. And you know what? When it all folded out, Doug Stangeland didn't want it to happen. And he looked for a way, and he found it. And here we are today asking you to find a way out for Doug Stangeland also. And I don't mean that in a way that this is some kind of a scam that I'm trying to play on you. This book, this law says that you can do it. If you believe that Doug Stangeland was under duress and coercion because of the threats made by Billy Barger. And more beyond that, the threats that Billy Barger was able to convey, that this was more than Billy Barger, this was the Hells Angels. Certainly something to fear. Yeah, this case is about the wrong guys. The wrong Jeff Muller, the wrong Sonny Barger's son. There wasn't any. So I'm going to ask you to find Doug Stangeland not guilty at the end of this case because of the defense as to why it happened. Not did it happen, not was it a horrendous act, not was it because Mr. Morrison tells you to do it because I can't do that. It's really up to you people. But let's put an end to this brutal tale that originated with a guy named Billy Barger. Let's put an end to it. Let's do it today, tomorrow, whatever it is in your deliberations. But let's decide that enough is enough. Let's let everybody go on with their lives and do what it is that they have to do. And you know what? When you reach your verdict and this case is all over, whichever way it is that you decide, it'll be over for you. But you know, there's a kid that testified in this court. There's a kid named Derek. And if Derek didn't touch your heart, I'm sorry. We did the best that we could. But Derek is a kid that'll live with the memory of Billy Barger for the rest of his life. He'll have those nightmares. He'll always remember that in his childhood, there was this man named Billy that threatened him. And there was a day out in the field somewhere in Missouri where Derek probably believed this was it. He was going to be killed, and that Billy Barger was going to do it to him. And if that isn't enough to convince you that these threats were real, then take a look, because they were real. Everybody said they were real. Maybe in the end, Billy wasn't who he said he was, but when the threats were made to that man and his son, those threats were real. That's enough of a reason for you to listen to the tall task I asked you to take. Find him not guilty, because the law will allow you to do that when you hear it. Live up to the obligation that you told us, you told the judge, you told me, you told Mr. Stangeland. You were going to be good jurors and you were going to follow the rules. You were going to listen to the laws the judge told you. This wasn't the most difficult case in the world with regard to the facts. The facts came into you. Billy is as Billy did. Billy was a bad person. I can't make anything out of evil except evil. Billy was an evil person. And I'm asking you to be good people. I'm asking you to be good jurors. I'm asking you to make a good decision. Make the right decision. Enough is enough. Let's put an end to this brutal tale. Time is now. Thank you. Thanks for listening to me.
Very good, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take a morning break about 20 minutes, and then we'll hear those statements.